Thank you, Jeff. Well, I would like to introduce one of my very favorite spiritual speakers. I love Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller because she always makes me think about things in a different way than I come to the service thinking about them. And she encourages me to think out of the box, and I hope that you all feel the exact same way. So I'd like to introduce Learning to Trust Self, Others, and the Universe. So welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. Oh my. When you set me up like that, I never quite know what to do. Hi.
Good morning.
So good. Such a wonderful group of folks. So if I do this, you can hear me more effectively, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, as has been intimated in a couple of other people's words, this has been an interesting time to live in, and that is a Chinese curse as well as a blessing. Yeah?
Yeah.
And a huge part of it has been we don't have the traditional systems to rely on quite the way we were taught to rely on them. Whether they be governmental systems or the media, the journalists, the whatever, they're not reliable. So how do we know? How can we experience trust in this environment? And one of the things that I have very much appreciated is the fact that Ralph Waldo Emerson described just about everything we need to know in one of his essays. One of them is one you were taught in high school and you were taught wrong, I guarantee it. Even Wikipedia doesn't understand it. It's called self-reliance. People look at that essay and they think it's all about the rugged individual. You know, you got to depend on your own abilities and skills. And no, that's not what the man was saying. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to take apart every single sentence of that essay and put it together again in what modern readers can sort of understand, and that's what natural abundance is in there, several other essays. And in that essay, he occasionally uses a capital S. And in fact, if you go back to the original, he almost always uses a capital S on the word self. He's not talking about our traditional normal thought processes and skills. He's talking about what he has in other places called the oversoul. So, from the beginning of self-reliance, he says, trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place that the divine has found for you. Great ones have always done so and confided themselves childlike to the genius that is absolutely trustworthy, seated at their heart. Yes, the genius, the absolutely trustworthy genius seated at the heart. That's what he's inviting us to rely upon in the essay, Self-Reliance. Woo. In our culture, that's tough. You know, humanity is unique among all the beings of the planet in how long it takes us to function. Society exists because children take 10 to 12 years from that initial birthing to when they can actually do the things that a person needs to do to survive in this planet. Now, there are 3 and 4-year-olds who can do some of it, And if you go on YouTube, every now and then you'll see a little Cambodian kid or Vietnam kid cooking meals for the whole family. And I remember at 5 I was making breakfast, and at 7 I was doing those things too. But I could not possibly have functioned in the world. There were skills that I had, right? And so we are born relying, trusting on everyone around us. We must trust. We are born to trust the people around us. They are the way that we get our food, our clothing, our shelter. They are the way we get any emotional support. They are the way that we feel connected, because humanity is a form of being that must feel connected. We must trust. We're born trusting others. We're not encouraged to trust our own awareness. How many remember being 2 and told no more often than not? And yet, Emerson tells us, society everywhere is in conspiracy against every one of its members. Society is a joint stock company in which the members agree for the better securing of his bread to each shareholder to surrender the liberty and the culture of each member. So what happens is there gets to be a point when we look around and we go, oh, I can't trust that person anymore. Maybe I never could. There are some folks that I work with who have memories of being left to cry or left hungry or any number of things as infants. And then as we get older, we realize, whoops, that's not necessarily someone I can trust. Yeah. And that is because this particular form of society that we grew up in is focused on the individual's rugged independence rather than the way other cultures, what we tend to call indigenous cultures, are designed, where the focus is on how do we support each other so that everyone benefits. So we grew up in an untrustworthy culture. We could have grown up in one where everyone can trust everyone else because everyone knows the limits and capabilities of everyone present, and I know I can trust that person to be those limits and those capabilities. And that's an issue many of us have to deal with. We think if you trust someone, you have to trust them all the way, and then we discover, whoops, there are limits. To what extent can I trust this person? One of my favorite teachers is a woman who was born in the late 1800s and died just a few years before I was born. And her name is Nona Brooks. And she was a profound, amazing, miraculous being who people could walk in at the end of one of her days and, she'd go, oh, that's not a problem. And they'd walk out without any symptoms. Because she had been in a place of consciousness knowing that the symptom is the consciousness, and she could lift her own and theirs to the point where the symptom wasn't real anymore for them. Quite a being, Nona Brooks. Turned out she herself had been completely healed through teaching, learning Emma Curtis Hopkins teachings in the town I was born in. I found out about that when I found out about her, and I went, oh, we have something in common. And her sisters and she set up a college, and then people who attended the college went, we need to not be going to traditional church anymore. And it turns out I was named in the building that they had created a church in Denver, Colorado. Lots of connections there. And my godmother's name was Nona. So Nona Brooks and I have a lot. I wish I had her skill, but have a lot in common. And one of the things that she experienced, I've also experienced, and that is she was managing this college and this church, and someone showed up being very, very helpful and proceeded to cause a lot of problems. And she didn't know what to do. She'd never encountered someone who appeared one way, but actually behaved in a way that was counter to the well-being of the whole. And she went inside and she did everything she knew how to do to undo the symptoms. She had been able to find a way to make sure there was always plenty of funds for the facilities and always, lots of support for all the projects she'd ever been involved in. And this one just was beyond her ability. And what she learned was limits and capabilities. This person could absolutely be trusted up to here, but not beyond that. Not in a different capacity other than their particular gift and strength. She had to deal with that even later because she found out that person it was prior to World War II, and she was realizing that person was being given a position of authority in the military, and she went, "Ooh, what am I going to do?" And she prayed, and she treated, and she did everything she knew how to do, and she lifted her consciousness as far and above, as high as she could, and she said, human beings have limits. I need to let the folks who've hired this guy know what his limits are. And it wasn't blame, it wasn't shame, it wasn't anything other than that. Huge awareness. We can trust as far as someone is able to be trustworthy. Yes. When I was growing up, Mom used to say, I could trust that guy as far as I could throw him. My mom was about the size of that. Right? She understood limits. All right, so when we get that we're living in a culture that is designed to encourage us not to trust people, but we can learn to trust them when we understand limits and capabilities. Ah, yes, this person's absolutely fabulous in this way at this time. There's easy ways and hard ways to learn that. I encourage everyone to learn it the easiest way possible, and that is pay attention to the signs when you first see them. Don't wait until you're knocked flat because of them, right? And sometimes it's an issue where people are no longer able to do what they once were, yes? I had a friend who she'd been a school teacher, she did 3 crossword puzzles every day, she was as bright as they come, and then she had hip surgery and they gave her that medication for not remembering, and she never got her short term back. Oh, that was hard. It was very hard, and we were living in the same space, the same house. And, how can we honor this person we have loved and cared for, and who has loved and cared for us as she's no longer capable? She has now limits she's never had. And so we would all pay attention, and we learned that although she didn't remember our names, she knew the connection, so that was cool. And we also learned that there were a lot of physical things she remembered. So if we just set her up with a task, if we told her to do it, she couldn't do it. But if we set her up with a task that was familiar, she was fine. It happened beautifully, easily. She was joyful about it. We were all happy. It was just fine. But if we had tried to depend on her to do something we had told her to do, it couldn't happen. So trusting the limits and the capabilities is a huge part of life in our world. Yes. Emerson says, whenever a mind is simple, it receives a divine wisdom and old things pass away. Means, teachers, texts, temples fall. It lives now, that mind lives now and absorbs past and present, past and future into the present hour. The mind that is relying on that inner awareness. And that's what happened to our friend. She became totally present, in the present. All the learning kind of fell away. And she was joyfully in the present. It was a marvelous teaching for me. The mind that simply is open to the inner wisdom does not need to fill itself, as I tend to do. I think Evelyn and I have a little bit in common there, with all the facts and all the processes and all the interests and all of that. And that is so cool. And Emerson was like that too. He was learning all the time. He had the biggest library. If you read Little Women, you know about his library because that's the old man in Little Women, is Emerson. He was their neighbor. And so that library, and he read it and he shared it, and he when he traveled, he saw connections and he wrote about it. His essay, Nature, was about writing about all the connections, the interconnected web of life, even though he didn't have that language. And he realized, as he went through his life, that the only thing that he could count on over and over and over again was the, quote, absolutely trustworthy source seated at the heart. Emerson was in his 20s when he was assigned his first church, and he married and he had a child. And very soon thereafter, like within 5 years, he no longer had his wife and his child. They'd passed away, and he no longer had the church because the Board of Trustees said, "Are you a Christian or not?" And he said, "I'm a Unitarian." And they said, "You need to think about whether you're even a minister." And he left at their request and went traveling, followed his heart, followed that inner wisdom, and learned about the interconnection of things. And he began to realize that we cannot trust people and the world to remain the same, but we can trust it to constantly change. We can trust it to constantly change. Wow. And he began to understand that there are universal processes. He called it reason with a capital R because all of those processes were logical. All of them fit together harmoniously. All of them unfolded in a marvelous intelligence. And we can trust those processes, which at the level of life means change. Bodies change, people change, worlds change, places change. When he accepted that, then he began to experience peace. It took trusting that the universal processes must include change to allow him to be able to go, okay, life is good. And I can trust that life will unfold in wonderful ways as I trust that inner wisdom to guide me. Now, it was in the essay Self-Reliance that Emerson said the famous line, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, politicians, and ministers." So the universe is about change. If I choose consistency with any human or cultural norm, I've lost it. I cannot trust that, right? He says, the ultimate fact on which we so quickly reach is that ultimately every topic, all the universe, moves into or is resolved as the ever-blessed one. Self, with a capital S, existence, is the attribute of the supreme cause, and it constitutes the measure of good. You can see why I say your teachers taught you wrong. This is his essay, Self-Reliance. It's got nothing to do with rugged individualism. What it's got to do with is learning that we can trust the universe in its reason, in its processes, and that will always involve change. And there is a core, a supreme cause that we have access to by going within, and we can trust, and ultimately can experience, as he said, the resolution of all into the ever-blessed one. Now, Ali chose a reading this morning that had to do with one and yet distinct. Yeah? And one of the things that Emerson was looking at was, are we all going to turn into mush? Is it all just going to be one yuck? Or one glowing, blissful beingness? Or is there something else going on here? And that was another piece of what he was trying to get at when he was trying to understand who and what we can trust. And that is, we can trust our own unique qualities, our own unique pattern within the one. Each of us showing up with our own capabilities and limitations and beauties and joys and harmonies and peace and grace. Because it is all one that we are, and each of us is unique within that. And he was able to see how universal processes do that long before. He was finished writing 50 years before quantum theory came out. Right? He didn't have that scientific framework to work with, but he could see it in the workings of nature and the people around him. And it's that one that is transcendent and yet inclusive of all the uniquely distinct aspects that made him a transcendentalist. We transcend the differences into the oneness of who we are. And at the core, at the essence, at that deep within, that absolutely trustworthy, seated in our hearts, that is the one. So can we learn to trust self? Can we learn to trust others? Can we trust this universe? Even when the world seems to be completely falling apart, coming unglued around us, in my experience, that happens because I trusted in something that isn't real. When I can go and find that deeper level of being, and can trust the universal processes and the oneness of all of us, my world doesn't experience that ungluing. And when I forget, it does. And which is why I sometimes encourage people to take a 3-week media fast. Because the media does not know this truth. The media believes what the high school teachers taught us. And what Wikipedia thinks is normal. The self, capital S self, the absolute trustworthy, deep within, that we can trust. And from that place, we can act, we can speak, we can love, we can move in a world that appears to be coming unglued, and we can move with that knowing of the universal process that is at work. Change is happening for the betterment of the whole, for the ultimate resolution into the one. That's what's real. May we always remember that, yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much.